Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming here. My name is Suzanne. I'm Director of Engagement at the Policy Institute here at King's. And we're really happy to welcome so many of you to tonight's event, which we're hosting in partnership with Ipsos. In the event tonight, Dr. Kerry Davis-Tyree, their brand new Director of Deliberative Engagement, will be discussing Professor James Fishkin's new and incredibly timely book, Can Deliberation Cure the Ills of Democracy? I'm going to leave it to Kerry to talk about the book and to talk about Jim's work in more detail. Suffice to say, we are so thrilled to have you here, Jim, and really grateful for the huge contribution that you've made to deliberative democracy. Everyone who is thinking about deliberation, who's out there practicing it, owes you a huge amount. So this anecdote is going to date me as well, but I remember when I was a very, very junior researcher at Ipsos, and I got in touch with you by fax, I think, to see if you would collaborate on a proposal with us. It was to have a national conversation on pensions, and we were thrilled when you said yes. And the deadline for that project was over the Christmas period, and I remember that you and I had a very late night conversation on New Year's Eve about sortition. It was the only way to bring in 2003. So back to today, at the Policy Institute, we're aiming to solve society's problems with evidence and expertise. And we're working on some of the greatest and some of the most intractable problems that we're facing. Things like the climate crisis and what adaptations and mitigation strategies we can adopt to ensure we have just transitions. What we do about increasing wealth inequality and the risks that this poses to social cohesion and political polarization and growing divides, of which there is a huge amount. And there's the climate that we're working as well. So there's the growing threat from misinformation. And we're operating in a low trust environment. In the World Values Survey that we do, according to the latest round, only a quarter of people in the UK have confidence in the government. All this demands that we do policy making differently, and taking a deliberative approach is one way of doing that. At the Policy Institute, we've been running mini-publics, juries, assemblies, as a means of understanding what works when it comes to deliberative policy making, and how these approaches can help us all reach for a more positive and a more equitable future. And in the last few months, we've shared this learning in a new programme which will see every civil service fast streamer in the policy profession take modules at King's in how to run deliberative processes, laying the foundations for decisions to be made differently as we go forward. And many of you in this room, in government, in research, in civil society, are doing similarly hard but really important work, and there is a lot of work to be done right now. But we do hope you enjoy tonight's discussion and leave energised and also hopeful for how things can change. I'm going to hand over to Kerry now and, of course, Jim, and thank you so much for being here at King's tonight. Thank you.
She has her notes. Thanks, Suzanne. I realise we're both back up here, almost 2 years to the day, for an event in our seminar series, Deliberate. And the topic that day was trust in trouble, how deliberative approaches can help us do democracy differently. So A, doesn't time fly? We were saying that to each other, yikes, although I can't beat 2002, 2003. And it made me reflect on how much it still is. I am indeed pretty much brand new in post-Ipsos in the UK, where alongside lots of talented people, we're working on establishing deliberation as part of the mechanism for how policy and society is done, and clearly place the role that research and evidence can play in that. Policy and decision makers need the right tools, and the public need the right opportunities to shape meaningful engagement. And we think to get there means flexibility in thought and application, being brave about innovation, and joining with others to tell the story and tackle the challenges. I'm also about 6 months into my visiting fellowship with you at the Policy Institute, and we have grand plans, so it's all very exciting. But perhaps more exciting, it's such a pleasure to have Jim here. From referencing him in my PhD, I'm not sure if he knows that, to working together on the UK's first online and biggest deliberative polls a few years ago, he's someone whose ideas, innovation and generosity continue to inspire my efforts for change, whilst he goes about having global impact in this field, and hopefully he will tell you the Mongolian medal anecdote. So the book that he's discussing this evening couldn't fail to be timely with the forces that are shaping our world, and is published at a critical juncture here in the UK's political landscape. The 2024 general elections saw a new Labour government elected after more than a decade, but they inherited a nation that's struggling with the cost of living crisis, underinvestment in public services, and significant levels of public debt. And whilst the new government has brought a degree of stability, it faces the daunting task of addressing these issues whilst navigating an increasingly polarising society and a global backdrop of a weakening of the norms and values that underpin a healthy democracy. So the democratic agenda needs a shift. Public trust in UK institutions is at a historical low at a time where government is also ambitious for its decade of renewal, and missions need engagement and collaboration at scale. So this is a moment to harness an idea of equal ambition with a simple focus. Deliberation leads to better decisions and can move the needle on outcomes, trust and legitimacy. Deliberative democracy, as Jim shows, can be a practical solution. By synthesising the results of 150 applications of deliberative democracy around the world, he demonstrates its potential to clarify the public will and depolarise divisions. And the book offers a story of thoughtful empowerment and democratic reform, strengthening but not replacing current institutions. So I read the question of the book not as a thought experiment, but as an invitation to those of us with nascent ideas or full-blown ambitions on what the next steps need to be to engage with the reality of the UK political picture and seriously consider how we can meet this moment. This might mean something on the what, like considering where deliberation and participatory approaches fit with how government is grappling with shorter and longer-term reforms and helping to target trust gaps. For example, a roadmap for knotty policy challenges and creating consensus on key issues, moving us from a reliance on opinion polling to take the public temperature and respond. What options are available not just to hear citizens, but involve them too? Or it might mean something about the how, which continues to evolve as use cases increase. For example, a focus on practices that promote inclusion and accessibility, exploring the fit of deliberative democratic methods with the concerns and interests of social justice, including hearing the most marginalised voices, and thinking about where and how participatory and deliberative democracy intersect. There is also, of course, the so what. Are we staying focused enough on what strategies can make forms of deliberation matter more, considering that regardless of its many theories and practices, deliberation is only meaningful if it's consequential. So we need to guard against style over substance. And of course, as a researcher, I'd say that also means that what is consequential also rests on what is considered evidential. So I'm on a bit of a mission in my day job to understand and transform how the efforts and results of deliberation speak better to the evidence we ultimately use in how decisions are made. I've talked before about the need to cultivate a deliberative imagination, the idea that the capabilities of deliberation can permeate social norms so that we get wider impact, wider benefits, particularly by improving the quality of public opinion and the capacities of policymakers to support society to navigate change, and that we remain bold with curiosity and experimentation about how to bring deliberation to life and where it can be used. Jim, somewhat unsurprisingly, goes bigger and better, providing a vision that combines election with deliberation, from which we build a more deliberative society, one that fosters mutual respect and more engaged voters, and offers the foundations of realising the benefits and the necessary changes to the way democracy is done that this offers. It's a transformative path, but one that can be practical and is evidence-based. So regardless of whether you're persuaded by what you hear this evening or read later, and I would recommend you get a copy of the book, obviously, have to do that, but you should. It's excellent and it's really accessible. We can and should all be concerned with strengthening the norms central to the guardrails of democracy. And I think Jim makes a very convincing case as to why deliberation is an essential part of this effort. So Jim, over to you.
Well, thank you. I'm really gratified by those two very generous introductions. And the book is accessible, and it's short, and if I'd had more time, I'd have made it even shorter. And it's also cheap, and available here in the UK now from Oxford. I have a pre-publication, in the US it's not going to come out till July, but I have a few pre-publication copies that they gave me. So now, I'm going to describe this research program that I've been on since I thought of it in a flash in 1988, a long time ago. And at first I was treated as a crazy idea, but it was about how to implement deliberative democracy, and nobody was talking about deliberative democracy in those days. And I'm going to tell you how I blundered into this particular model, how we've improved it, and how it actually does credibly solve some of the key problems of democracy, problems that have... so the question mark is the most important part of the title, because you probably won't believe that it has these results. What we've done with national controlled experiments in highly visible cases on highly difficult and contentious topics, we've gotten these results over and over. And not only that, we've shown how they last. And that has led me from one stage to another to build up to this idea that Carrie referred to as creating a more deliberative society. But I'll have to get there. So this is where I'm located these days. And that's the book, which is the short summary of everything I've learned all these years. It's a distillation where the technical analyses are in the American Political Science Review a couple of times, British Journal of Political Science, and another key journal, Perspectives on Politics. So you can turn to those articles which are referred to if you want to understand the analyses and how we explain these rather surprising results. But so I'm not just blowing smoke. These are national controlled experiments. And I claim that deliberation, at least on our model, done appropriately, can solve 4 key challenges. The 4 key challenges are, and the first was the reason why I developed deliberative polling when I first thought of it and published it in The Atlantic and a long time ago in August 1988, was to help assess the will of the people. And why is that a problem? Well, it's become more of a problem because we're in our filter bubbles, our enclaves. John Stuart Mill, one of my intellectual heroes, argued in On Liberty that error would be self-correcting and it should be tolerated because people would hear the other side. But in our current system of political communication, people don't hear the other side. They never hear the corrections because they mostly hear people and sources that they already agree with, even if the sources are communicating balderdash or propaganda or just something that somebody thought up, or not even somebody, it could be a bot spread on social media. So assessing the will of the people in this environment is hard. The extreme partisan polarization, which applies in my country, the US, but applies in a lot of countries, creates deadlock and division and fuels the perception that democracies can't get anything done, which opens the door to some kind of competitive authoritarianism, or even some kind of, in the best case, some kind of benign authoritarianism like maybe Singapore, where cost-benefit analysis is rapidly replacing anything that would have to do, could be called democratic decision-making, in my view. Thirdly, when people vote, the consensus among political scientists, which you can find in Aiken and Bartel's The Realist Theory of Democracy and other such books, 2 old friends of mine, by the way, is that when people vote, they're not capable of voting on the issues, so they vote just based on party loyalty, tribalism. But we find that people are very capable of voting on the issues. They say finding what I would call a deliberative voter who thinks about the issues and votes accordingly is about as common as finding a unicorn. But the deliberative democracy process creates unicorns routinely, and I'll show you the kind of evidence that we have. And if we had deliberative voters, or more deliberative voters, that would also help create not only better policies, but it would increase the essential connection, which is the whole point of democracy, that there's some connection between the will of the people and what's actually done. Otherwise, you might as well have a Singaporean cost-benefit analysis kind of governance on behalf of the people, and forget about by the people. But I think we need to give a great effort into rejuvenating the democratic process so that the will of the people can be consequential and people can get what they really think should be done. That's the whole point of having a democracy. And the fourth problem is we've been doing these experiments now. It's gone up since you prepared. It's now 160, but around the world in every inhabited continent. But and routinely with very encouraging results. But it only applies to a microcosm, a random sample, a stratified random sample. How can we spread it more broadly? And I will tell you, our plans and efforts are already underway to spread it more broadly, because in addition to having a good sample deliberate on that's representative of the people in its viewpoints and its attitudes as well as its demographics, we also find that there are these byproducts of deliberation: mutual respect, trust, increased internal political efficacy. That is, people think for the first time, they have opinions that are worth listening to. They become more engaged in thinking about the issues. And even as much as a year later, they vote accordingly compared to the control group in the same study. And it's not the drop-off. We do balance tests. We know that it is, in fact, the effect of deliberation. And that's an interesting puzzle how that happens, but I will try to explain it. So those are my, that's the third challenge. The fourth challenge is what I call creating a more deliberative society. And I'm going to preview the basic idea is that you know that there were random samples, there were important decisions made by random sampling in ancient Athens. You think of Athens as the assembly, which is sort of a great venue for populism, actually. But the Council of 500 was selected by, if I had much more time, I would show you a picture that I've taken, but it's a well-known, that they had a machine to select the random samples. It was called the Clarotarian, K-L-E-R-O-T-E-R-I-O-M, Clarotarian. And the Council of 500 determined the agenda of what could be talked about in the assembly. Then they got to be worried about orators who would stand up and try to talk the assembly into approving irresponsible proposals. So they had a special court with another 500 selected by the machine who could discipline or punish somebody if they made a dangerous or irresponsible proposal. Because the orators actually went to rhetorical school to train themselves to whip up the crowds. Because if you have an assembly, and the Pnyx where it met could only hold 6,000, but 6,000 people, you can't really deliberate. If the 6,000 people, you even have to have a great voice, a stentorian voice, in order to even be heard. But it would appeal to the emotions of the people, and such a process got them into war with Sparta, which was disastrous. Then when they got out of the war, they designed another random sample that would have to pass on the something. If it passed the assembly, would no longer become law. It would have to be like a court case prepared, and 500 people would hear the arguments for and against, and then only then would it become law. And so it was a kind of perfectly democratic break on the passions of the people gathered together in a large crowd. So all of that is to say that from the beginnings of democracy, there was an attempt to wrestle with what I would call deliberation as opposed to the passions of the people. We want the people involved, but we want them to encourage them to think about the issues carefully, and that same problem recurs over and over again. The reason I talk about Athens is that Aristotle said that Athens had a rotation method. You could rule and be ruled in turn in Athens because there were so many occasions where you could be selected. And people have said, oh, that's just for a tiny society between 30 and 60,000 eligible male citizens. I'm not defending that it was only males, but that was 2,400 years ago. Now, the point is, so people have said, well, that's for a small society. But in the last part of the book, I speculate about all kinds of things that we have done in different social contexts with deliberative polls that could be done, each one justified for its own sake. But if you did all of those enough, everybody could also rule and be ruled in turn and have reasonable opportunities to deliberate with moderated discussion with diverse others. And to my surprise, it has lasting effects. We could create a more deliberative society if we were really serious about it. It wouldn't require, in my country, having a constitutional amendment is the barrier to doing most things. It wouldn't require a constitutional amendment. It would just require the will to see that in all these different contexts, and I'll try to describe some of them. But we've actually piloted a lot of them. Okay, so that's the overview of where I'm going. And I'm going to zip through these slides and hope that Carrie will signal me when I've got about 10 minutes to go and maybe 5 minutes to go. Because once I get lost in this stuff, I just keep talking. So you might say, but let me first get the difference between conventional polling or standard public opinion polling and what we're doing, or why you can't rely on standard public opinion for this purpose. Even though Gallup thought you could, and he thought he had brought the democracy of the New England town meeting to the large-scale nation state with public opinion polling. But it doesn't work that way. The three problems that you need to overcome are first, and this is standard, just go back to Anthony Downs, there's rational ignorance. If I've got one vote in millions, one opinion among millions, why should I spend a lot of time thinking about the details of public policy? I've got other things to do. I've got a job. I've got a family. If I'm a student, I've got school. I've got all these things. And I can make more of a difference in those things than I can on the pension policy or the electoral system or whatever the issue is. Would that it were otherwise. We would like citizens to think about the issues and get involved, and that citizens like that are supposedly as common as unicorns, but they are not. There are people who do get engaged, but most people, most of the time, do not. So there's rational ignorance. Secondly, there's the problem of what I call phantom opinions. Phil Converse at the University of Michigan, as many of you know, called them non-attitudes. A friend of mine now passed away, George Bishop, gave the best example of that. He did studies in polls of the attitudes about the Public Affairs Act of 1975. People answered the question whether they supported or opposed the Public Affairs Act of 1975. But it didn't exist. There was no Public Affairs Act of 1975. A lot of people didn't want to admit that they don't know, so they basically guessed. 20 years later, the Washington Post decided to celebrate the non-existent Public Affairs Act of 1975 by asking about its repeal. They told half the sample that the Republicans wanted to repeal it, half the sample that the Democrats wanted to repeal it, and they got very different answers accordingly. But it didn't. You can't repeal something that doesn't exist. And my Stanford colleague, Doug Rivers, who has a big role in YouGov these days, took the same agenda to Britain, to the UK, and asked the British people what they thought of the Public Affairs Act of 1975. And he got the same result, and didn't exist here either. So those are, now some, of course, on many opinions, people have an opinion, but it may just be a reaction to sound bites and headlines and not involve a lot of reflection. And then there are certain subgroups, are true believers now increasingly on either side of the political spectrum, taking more extreme positions, who really have strong opinions, but then the problem there is that we will find that they have never heard the other side because they're in their enclaves or filter bubbles, which is why Lynn Vavreck in a recent book said that we're not only polarized and divided, our opinions are calcified. Calcified to me implies they're immovable. That's because she kept in time series with new samples finding the same thing over and over. So therefore, from that perspective, the findings that I will summarize for you are rather surprising because they're not calcified. Indeed, we find more movement among the most extreme people, which to me was a surprise. I mean, I have to be frank with you, a lot of what I'm going to tell you about involves surprises. So I have an embarrassingly simple method doing this. It's so commonsensical, I almost hate to admit how it's just common sense. But it's not some spooky, voodoo, crazy thing. How can we provide good conditions for a random sample and representative sample of the public to think about complicated issues, particularly when they are contentious? So there's an agenda of information that on issues that are on offer, things that might actually be done. There's an advisory group that's independent that represents different points of view, maybe different political parties, maybe retired members of different political parties so they don't have a direct stake, experts, and they vet the materials, the briefing materials. The briefing materials are also boiled down into video versions for those who don't want to read a long document. But both are made available only after people take the initial survey. There's an initial survey, and what we like to do is randomly assign after the survey to, before anybody knows that there's going to be an invitation to a treatment and a control group. The control group, just during the same period of recruitment, which may be several weeks, they take the survey again. That way, in theory, if there was some big thing going on in the world that might affect the opinion, rather than the deliberation, we know that. When we did a national thing about climate in the US with 1,000 deliberators, the control group didn't change a whit, even though we had the worst summer on record up till then in terms of natural disasters. People never made the connection to climate. But the deliberators changed dramatically and depolarized by party also. Anyway, so we have balanced information, small group deliberation, moderated discussion with diverse others seems to be the magic elixir that brings deliberation to life. So we have small groups, randomly assigned to small groups, and we usually have human moderators, but lately we have an AI-assisted online moderation platform where people see each other in small groups of 10, just like a Zoom, but it does the moderation, or rather, it assists the participants, it empowers the participants in effect to moderate. I'll explain how that goes, but it's part of our vision for how to spread the deliberation to much larger numbers beyond the random sample. Because in principle, this platform, which was developed at Stanford with the computer scientists, which we developed with the computer scientists, can reach millions. And at some point, with various occasions, we'd like to do that. But we've certainly had it reach many thousands. So coming out of the small group deliberation, people still have questions. So they work hard to agree on the key questions that they want to ask panels of competing experts who represent the different points of view. The competing experts, and also competing politicians sometimes in other panels, the competing experts don't give a speech. They just respond to questions from the sample. The groups focus on what is it they really need to know before they decide. And we collect, this is very important, the ultimate considered judgments of the people in confidential questionnaires. We don't have the people come to a consensus. If there's a consensus, it's in the data. but we want to protect the conclusions from the social pressure to go along with the crowd. All of the criticisms that I'm aware of the deliberative processes come out of the jury literature, which is one of the most extensively studied, probably the most extensively studied deliberative institution. And the juries do a pretty good job of deciding a simple question of fact, but they tend to be dominated by the more advantaged, by the more educated, and they also tend to go to extremes. Cass Sunstein's law of group polarization shows that. Doesn't happen in our process, and we've sorted out why that is. But part of it is that our people aren't subject to go along to the social pressure to agree with the rest of a verdict. This is why I show 12 Angry Men every year in my general class on deliberative democracy and its critics. So those are the three components. You've got an idea. Okay, so what would the people think under good conditions? So I've wasted a big portion of my time without even giving you a single project. So we've done, as I say, 160 of these. We've even done European-wide twice in Brussels, but we were too early. So now when the Europeans are doing some deliberative panels, they don't have the whole of Europe together with simultaneous translation the way we did it. But if you're interested, you can see a movie that some British producers did about it, a documentary called Europe in One Room, which we have on our website. But we've done it in, all over Africa. We've done it in Japan. We've even done it in China for local government very successfully. And we've done it under situations of grave division like Northern Ireland. But let me just, now this was the first one. And I actually started it in the UK when I was a visiting fellow commoner at Trinity College, Cambridge, where I went back to Cambridge. I'd been a student at Cambridge and at the other King's. And so I wish I could, don't have time to really show it, but this, it was on the issue of crime. Actually, Tony Blair was the first of the experts who came out to respond, because he was the Shadow Home Secretary. But I don't have time to show this, but because I want to get through a lot of projects. But it actually started here, and Channel 4 did a bunch of them. Then the commissioning editor, who we worked with, David Lloyd, had a stroke and was replaced by somebody else, and they wanted to do other things. So those stopped. But I took the prototype of that to the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, who's a very famous broadcaster at PBS, and we started doing them in the US, including nationally. And when we did that, we also did them on practical issues. These were interesting cases because we had 8 projects on how Texas should get its power, and the public was willing to actually pay more to subsidize, just a little bit more, to subsidize wind power. And the Public Utility Commission implemented that, and Texas went from being last among the 50 states in the amount of wind power to being first by 2007 when it surpassed California, and it continues. The public wanted wind power to be a big component because it was clean, and over time they also came to support it because of climate change, and they de-emphasized coal, and there was still support for natural gas because it's cleaner than coal, and also a big investment in demand-side management, which is basically conservation, because if you have a greatly increasing need, if you help people learn to conserve energy, you can reduce the need. So you can see that from 52 to, that was like a lightning bolt in Texas, and the result is well documented. It's on our website. And well, we did a bunch of them in Japan, and that's Professor Sone, my Japanese collaborator of Keio University. But I just want to show you this project on pensions. It was a very simple case sponsored by civil society. The government was about to privatize the pension system. Japan is getting very old. And so the ratio of people who are working and retired was changing so dramatically, and it still is, that the government thought if they used a Chilean solution of everybody having their own account, and they were just responsible for investing it, that would be good. Misleadingly, they sort of called it the funded system, meaning that everybody would have their own fund. So then they polled. And the best that the public could think about it, oh, do you want the funded system or the unfunded system? People wanted the funded system. About 70% in the polls wanted the funded system. About 70% in our sample before Deliberation wanted the funded system. But when they understood that it meant that they individually would be responsible for investing their savings, and they would have to live on that when they got old, that support was cut in half. It went to 35%. And that was also like a lightning bolt. And we had NHK and Asahi Shimbun, which likes to call itself the New York Times of Japan. When I went there for an interview, they had on the front, the New York Times of Japan on the front of the building. I thought that was remarkable. But in any case, but what the public did support was increasing the consumption tax, a kind of a national sales tax, which was very low, in order to keep the system afloat. And that's what the government decided. They pulled back the proposal, and that's what they have still. We also did, commissioned by the government with my same collaborators, what to do after the disaster for Fukushima. And that was a case that has replicated. When there's some big challenge, this allows the government to share responsibility for the solution with the public. Because before they got to us, they knew about us because of the other project. And we did 8 projects in Japan, actually. But, and now we're planning more. They had town meetings around the country, which turned out to have the anti-nuclear activists who are very, very active and energetic in Japan yelling at the electricity company employees who told me that they were dressing up to look like ordinary citizens. Oh, I've only got 10 minutes. Oh, I've got to keep going. That's Shingori is the South Koreans. President Moon had this big challenge of 2 nuclear reactors. His party was anti-nuclear. He came into office. They were half-built. Was he going to finish building them or not? And because we'd done a lot of things in South Korea, he commissioned a committee to supervise it, a scientific committee. And and the question was, should they finish the nuclear reactors? And then he pledged, to my amazement, whatever the people decide is what I'm going to do, because it was a big problem. If they didn't finish it, then they were going to have to import fossil fuels in much greater quantities, at least for a while, even though they could do renewables and some conservation would take a while. But if they did, he was going against his pledge. So they moved to approve the nuclear plants, and we've done a number since. Now, I want to introduce the polarization discussion. This was my first indication about this, and I should have picked up on it, but I didn't. I didn't think about it more broadly. But we did a project in Bulgaria about the condition of the Roma, a big national sample in this hall of the people that was left over from the Soviet era. And it was about the condition of the Roma. And one of the items was that the Roma schools should be closed and all the children should be bused to school with everybody else. And New York Times flew in, Nicholas Wood, who was a correspondent then, and interviewed me and interviewed the prime minister, he told me that he came because he was certain I would fail. And he wanted to see it. This really surprised me. And I said, why am I going to fail? He said, because you have no idea about the antipathy towards the Roma, how virulent it is. Maybe I didn't, but in any case, we did it. And you see the result that the public went for the idea of closing the Roma schools, busing the children with everybody else. And that has happened since. I was at a big celebration of our work in Eastern Europe in Warsaw, at the University of Warsaw, and the Bulgarians came jubilant because they had finally desegregated the Roma-only schools, and they said that this was the catalyst that allowed it to be done. Now, I got to tell you about Bulgaria. So this is the parliament building in Bulgaria. That is Genghis Khan, that statue who looms over everything in Mongolia. Excuse me, in Mongolia. That is our national sample selected by the Census Bureau. 85% of the people who were contacted came, which is extraordinary. They came because they were invited at government expense to deliberate about changes in the Constitution. We've now done this twice. According to the law on deliberative polling, which is described in my last book and reproduced in the appendix, which works this way. There's an independently elected advisory committee, which you can see on the front row. The guy in red is the chief monk of Mongolia, who I saw actually 2 weeks ago. Everybody else is the sample, except if you're very keen-eyed, you'll see me in the back somewhere. I snuck into the picture. And we have a similar picture for the second one. Twice we changed the Constitution by this method. So the people in the sample deliberate in the Parliament building in small groups, moderated small groups. They're the same process I've described. The final questionnaire shows the changes of opinion, or their considered judgments at the end. The independent advisory group passes on the results to the Parliament. The law says that if the Parliament should, in its wisdom, support the results by 2/3 vote, it can become a new constitutional amendment. And that has happened twice. And most recently, very interestingly, it happened changing the Constitution to greatly increase the number of members of Parliament, and those additional members are selected by proportional representation. Now, why was that important? Because what was really on the mind of the public, and we actually analyzed all the small group discussions. We have a large language model that analyzes all the arguments, and the people wanted more choices. That was the overwhelming. They wanted more choices than just the two parties that were battering against each other. They wanted third parties elected. So then they held an election, and they got third parties elected as well. And then they had a celebration. And in the celebration, they translated this book into Mongolian, which they presented to me. And the president gave me their highest state honor, which is this gold medal. And you can see a picture on our website on the front of me with the gold medal and the background to it. I didn't bring the gold medal. I was afraid of losing it, which I'm quite capable of. And now, but the point is, this design combines the deliberations of the people in a way with the deliberations of the Parliament. And getting a 2/3 vote in a divided parliament is an accomplishment. And they did it twice for two different amendments. So that's an example of institutionalization. And we also have a control group there, so we know that the people who made the journey are no different from the people who were not asked to make the journey. 5 minutes, okay, I've got to hurry more. Okay, so I've got to do the polarization. I'm sorry, Carrie. So we did this America in One Room. The New York Times put the pictures in the paper. But what I want to show you, here, I'll just give you one example. On immigration, and this is why I know that the views are not calcified. Of that sample, I've got a Democratic slide and a Republican slide. These were in the New York Times, but they were also explained in our article in the American Political Science Review. Notice, before deliberation, 79% wanted the undocumented immigrants to return to their home countries. After deliberation, only 40%. Before deliberation, only 31% supported visas for low-skilled workers. After deliberation, 66%. And there would be these big changes on immigration. You can see them on our website. You can, and the Democrats had some big movements too, but I don't have time to. Do I have time to play the video or not? Okay, so this video gives you a picture of how the changes happened, because immigration is still the most contested issue. So CNN gave it a fair amount of coverage, but some of it in write-ups. But they did this 4-minute or three minute. I'm trying to get permission to show it. 3-minute video of one of the groups, and you can see at the beginning how hostile they are to each other, and at the end, 2 of the key people are actually hugging each other at the end, and we have an explanation for that too. But
in the heart of Texas.
Last table on your left, they will check you in.
A little bit more serious, that's beautiful. Yeah, there, that's great.
526 Americans gathering.
I love this. Great, thank you so much.
Upset about the partisan divide.
Let's be real.
This is an experiment, a scientific sample. Democrat, Republican, and Independent, representing 47 states.
you are going to listen to other people whom you never ordinarily would encounter.
Reflecting who votes on Election Day.
Hey, how are you?
It's a 4-day in-person poll called America in One Room. Before arriving, this group took one poll on the major issues in the 2020 election. Here,
It's a great question.
they listened to candidates, to experts,
This is really your time to have your voice heard.
and break into randomly selected small groups to talk.
When's the last time you talked to a 70-year-old white Republican?
I don't think I've ever talked to a 70-year-old white Republican, but until now.
You know, we're being stormed at the southern border, and that's a problem that needs to be dealt with.
The illegal immigrants that we have today, you can see it all of the time, waving their country's flags, burning the American flag.
Sure, on TV you see the ones that do all this crazy stuff, but most of them work.
Like the country, this group is deeply divided about immigration.
I feel like you should have a wall, a border wall.
And along comes ICE, deports them. How can we continue to do that? In America.
We don't want to learn your language. We don't want to follow your customs. We follow our own customs. And to me, it looks like they don't want to become Americans.
You know, Gary, your family were illegal immigrants. The American Indians, this was their country.
Yeah.
All of us came here, and we didn't learn their language. We didn't learn their customs. We said, you take ours, and you take it now. So we're all children of illegal immigrants. I don't know how we can be so choosy about the new ones.
That got to be a little heated in there.
It definitely did. But we've all respected one another and got to hear each other's opinions, and I never thought I would be able to relate to someone that was a Republican, and I have, more than once.
More than once.
Right.
I think it's been interesting to talk to Trump supporters, because I don't meet many.
She's like, I don't want to be a part of this.
Seeing all of these people from all of these other walks of life, exactly how my views have changed on it, I'm not so hardcore.
And what is your advice about political discourse in this country?
You need to listen, not yell, not scream. You need to talk.
At the end,
And this is how your voice will be heard.
a closing poll to see if there's been any movement on the issues, but already visible.
Like, it's opened my mind to see that I need to listen to other people's views.
Is the recognition that there is unexpected power
I really enjoyed you being here.
in bridging the divide.
I have enjoyed this beyond measure.
Okay, well, I'm running out of time, but let me just say, a year later, they voted dramatically differently than the control group. And we also have an online platform. I'm just going to summarize. We have an online platform, which I was going to show you, which performs the role of moderator in video-based small group discussions like a Zoom of 10, but there's no human moderator. It's AI assisted, but what it really does is it assists the group in moderating itself by controlling the queue. Everybody talks for 45 seconds at a time. It nudges the people who haven't signed up for the queue. It intervenes if the people are uncivil, and it guides the group in coming up with its own key questions for the plenary session. And we've tested it. We tested it in controlled experiments against the human moderators, and it does just as well. In fact, it gives almost identical results. So we think that's proof positive of how to spread the deliberative process, and we're using that to spread it in the schools, with young people, colleges across the country, and we think it could scale. So I mentioned the voting. Well, you'll have to, climate was another one that we did, where we went back with dramatic results on climate, also particularly among the Republicans, changing their view about climate and energy, and went from 35% to 50-some% supporting, and we had almost 70 proposals, and we got almost everybody. Almost everybody ended up supporting them. So again, that was depolarizing, and they voted according to climate a year later as well in the midterm elections, and same for democratic reform. So that's a picture of the platform. But I'm just going to end by sketching that there are all these different venues, many of which we piloted at least once, putting an initiative. We have the initiative in California, putting an initiative on the ballot through a public interest proposition on the ballot, because most of the time, very wealthy people spend $3 million just for the signature collections. And we've actually worked that out once and would like to do it again. Evaluating ballot propositions. We've got corporations using this to consult their customers. We've got different ways of institutionalizing deliberative mini-publics. Deliberation in the schools. Bruce Ackerman and I have this idea of Deliberation Day, where before an election, everybody would deliberate, and we were told, well, that's completely impractical. But with this platform, it's very practical if somebody would sanction it and support it. I've got some musings about how to change constitutions. There are a lot of different things, but the idea is that if you had enough of these, you could apply the rotation method at the large scale, creating a more deliberative society, particularly since we've shown this has lasting effects. So I'm just going to conclude on that point. Okay.
Thanks, Jim. To be fair, you did warn me that you would
go
over
do we have
time.
microphones? We don't have microphones.
Yeah, you've got one, no?
What?
You have one.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah. Stealth microphones. Yeah, you did warn me that you'd go over time, so I'm doing the chairs thing. I'm going to cede any of my questions so that we go to the room instead. So you're all very welcome. I'm sure you're going to be asking many of the same things I would. So so we open the floor to questions. I'd like to challenge you. Obviously, it'd be nice to know your name. I'd like you to challenge, instead of a kind of a some fluff. Instead of a sort of a long thing about where you're from and what you do, it would actually just, we've got a real mixture of people in the room, so I'd be more interested to hear where you're coming from. So are you a researcher, are you in education, are you working in community, or policy, rather than, I mean, it's up to you. But that's my invitation to you. So, have we got any questions? Or if you want a minute to think about it, I definitely do. Okay, so yeah, lady in the floor top first. Oh, sorry, would you mind using the mic? Sorry, that's my mistake. I should have asked you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, in terms of the kind of criteria for the kinds of issues you think are best suited or not for these kind of things, do you think that there is anything that is out of scope in terms of your deliberative approaches you're using, or anything can be tackled in this way? And is there anything, if we were starting off in order trying to build support for this, where would you start in terms of the type of issues?
So to my surprise, any issue that is complex or controversial can be used for this. If it's complex, the public probably doesn't have a considered judgment about it already because it's too complicated for them to think about it. Particularly when there are competing values and goals at stake, it's very good. And the people can bring their own assessment of their values to the issue as long as you do the hard work to make it clear. I sometimes thought that if it were very controversial, that you might not get any movement. But even from the first one that we did in Northern Ireland and then that project in Bulgaria, I saw that even if there are strong passions, you can get very considerable movement. The people who feel most strongly, as we analyzed in the immigration there in that American One Room, they're the ones who changed the most. So all of that was counterintuitive to me. I would say you can do this anywhere except we did a whole series with USAID across Africa with partners who were public health professors, and they kept asking me, do you want to do it in conditions of poverty and disease, or do you want to do it in conditions of conflict? Those were the choices. I said, I don't want to do conditions of conflict, actual conflict, because I didn't want to get anybody killed. So we did a lot of things about disease and issues like that in Uganda, Ghana, Senegal, Malawi, Tanzania. And it worked very well on those issues. So it's the kinds of places. So it has to be safe to gather the people together. Even online, you have to worry about safety. But apart from that, if you can identify the issues and there's some public question, actually the harder the better. I mean, you don't want a completely technical issue. You want an issue that impinges on the public's values. So nuclear power was a good one in both Japan and South Korea. But you don't want to ask them how to build the reactor. You want to ask them about the basic question of the goals that are to be achieved and how they evaluate those goals. So that would be my basic answer. So it's actually very optimistic.
Thank you. Chris, and then I'll come to you in the shirt. Or I sort of say Johnny, in the teal shirt.
Thanks. Hi, Chris Shaw. I work in the UK Parliament promoting the use of deliberative methods. So thank you very much. Just trying to promote one on the subject of immigration. So thank you very much for showing the video. That was really helpful. But my question is how do you go about convincing professional politicians that ordinary people can debate and reach a consensus in a better way than they do? And that sort of assumes that they want to reach a consensus, which is maybe an assumption that is wrong on this particular subject.
Well, the results speak for themselves. Very often we have important people who observe the process and react sometimes as expert panelists in the process. Although sometimes the really busy people, we get the retired ones. But anybody who has any contact with this, we just did Pennsylvania in one room, to my surprise, last weekend, and I flew directly from Philadelphia here and arrived at 6 a.m. this morning for this, which had long been planned. And we had Governor Shapiro there, and we had Hillary Clinton there on the foreign policy, and we had the Speaker of the legislature, and we had a prominent Republican member, and so we had key people, but we also who were politicians, but we also had, and I can't speak to whether they were convinced because I didn't talk to them afterwards, but they were there, and when we did those electric utility ones, the head of the Public Utility Commission was initially very skeptical, and he was a George W. Bush appointee, And he thought, well, you just need markets. You don't need any of this stuff. And he observed the people in their deliberations, and he grabbed me by the lapel and he said, Jim, you know, these people aren't lobbyists. And I said, no, they're not lobbyists. And he said, but listen to them. Listen to how informed they've become. So then he got up, to my surprise, and he announced on the television broadcast that he was going to make the companies do exactly what these people want, no matter what it was, which was overstating it. And the company that was paying for it, they were looking at me like, what had I gotten them into? But what they came out with was actually very sensible, and everybody ended up being happy. So I think contact with it is the most persuasive thing. The results are often the second most persuasive thing. So it's been a long, hard, slog doing these things. But I think but sometimes there's an issue like the one I showed you with President Moon in South Korea, or in Japan on the pensions, or in Japan on the Fukushima disaster, where eventually the government thinks that it's actually to their advantage to share some responsibility for the conclusion, because they're going to take in incoming fire no matter what they decide. So if they can say, well, the people in a representative sample came out on the trade-offs this way, and here are the reasons why, it gives them an additional line of defense to do something reasonable. The other thing reason that policymakers sometimes like this model is there's usually an agreement with the sponsors, and if the government is sponsoring it, it's part of the committee process that leads to the definition of the proposals. There are no surprises in the sense that we need the before opinion in order to see the before and after. So you only put on the agenda things that you're willing to have considered. So it's not some other completely different things. So the mistake of the Citizens' Assembly, one of them is Macron, when he got the Citizens' Assembly recommendations, which were voluminous, but dealt with all kinds of things he hadn't even thought of. He threw up his hands reportedly and said, well, I can't do this stuff. And this created a lot of backlash. But in the deliberative polling model, you know, before you go into the field, here are the proposals that have been agreed to. Here's the preparation. Here are the pros and cons. This is all vetted. These are reasonable things that could be done. And let's see how people deal with the trade-offs. And so there are no surprises in that sense. So and also we do it in a weekend as opposed to 2 years. So it's also very practical. Also, we get the data of where the people start and then how they change, which also adds to the credibility. I've got a philosophical critic who's now become one of my good friends, Professor Christina Lafont, the chair of the philosophy department at Northwestern, who's written 2 books about the question of why should the rest of the people listen to this? And part of my answer is, the rest of the people start out in aggregate the way the sample does, and then they move accordingly. So she's got a good target with the citizens' assemblies, but not with my stuff, in my view. Because even the Irish government wouldn't permit, the civil servants wouldn't let my friend Jane Souter, I'm very friendly with all of these people, but the academic who was one of the 2 academics in charge of the Irish projects, they wouldn't let her collect the opinions on the issues before the people started deliberating. So she had no before data. So she doesn't know what the opinion changes are. We do. And so that's part of the story, in my view.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. Sorry, teal jumper, thank you for waiting patiently. And then I will address this side of the room. Oh, no, sorry, in this 3rd row back. Apologies with the glasses. Thank you. There's lots of people wearing glasses. This is entirely
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
I've worked in immigration policy for 7 years. Worked for a cross-party think tank, so I'm trying to see a balanced perspective on immigration. And I have to say, I've changed my view on what that perspective is every single day of those 7 years. So I've changed my view about 2,000 times. And if somebody had asked me to write what is for one of these get-togethers, what facts would you like to bring in front of them, whether you're looking at it from a perspective of the migrants, as frankly a lot of that video did, or whether you're looking at the sort of left-behind communities within the country, or whether you're looking at state finances. And I'd love to believe that this could work. I suppose when I see a big change from one side, I'm thinking on one hand, that's great, and on the other, have they really been provided with balanced information? You said that
all of that's transparent.
Yeah.
You can read it yourself.
But I suppose I'm coming back to the question. You were obviously very quick because you had no time to run through a hell of a lot of stuff around how you do the balanced information. So I'm just interested a bit more in that. And do you also say, well, that's sort of rectified by the expert Q&A as well, because people have the chance to ask questions to people who are not allowed to present, but they just have to answer what's been asked.
So the challenge here, Jim, is to reply to this in like 30 seconds.
What's that?
The challenge is to reply to this in about 30 seconds, or perhaps signpost to other ways.
So the way we keep rewriting until the committee is satisfied, and the committee represents very divergent perspectives, but responsible ones on the issue. So nothing is perfect, but it's balanced. And then the participants ask their own questions, and they come up with their own arguments about it, or there's something left out, and they bring that to the plenary sessions. And we try to have competing experts answering the same question. And sometimes if there's a misleading answer, the experts correct themselves. Then sometimes we also have a politicians panel where the politicians usually don't appear in the same at the same time, but seriatim, and they ask those questions to the politicians. So dialogue is the way of is a method of successive approximation to something that is reasonable, and at least they get over the most misleading factoids about it. And also they start listening and considering the voices of the people on the other side, which previously they might have just rejected. And so I won't say it's perfect, but it's pretty good. And everything is transparent. You can read, the briefing materials are online, the videos are usually online, the results are online. Our analyses are online as to what the people were talking about in the small groups. And of course, like any complicated project, it's a moving target. It gets better and better, or we're trying to make it better and better. So I can understand your skepticism, but that's the best we can do. And in this environment of one-sided information and persuasion and propaganda, I think its merits begin to shine even more.
Okay, I'm going to look at this side of the room now. Cool. So, and we're running out of time. So, if I could come to in the scarf, Catherine, and then check shirt in the back. Thank you.
My name's Catherine. I'm a civil servant. I have the flip question to the first question. You've described a really powerful tool that you've created. It seems fairly clear that it can cure lots of ills. But where would you like to most see that power being used? What topics should it be exercised on? Just thinking about where the world is now and who by.
Well, I would like to see governments using it in the same spirit that President Moon used it, or the Japanese used it, or the South Koreans recently tried to use it, but the whole situation in South Korea unraveled after they did 2 national projects, which, as I said, the speaker endorsed, and on pension reform and on electoral reform, with dramatic results. But now with the new presidential election in South Korea, my collaborators, they're extremely hopeful about launching a big initiative. And I saw them in Mongolia, and I'm going to see them again in Taiwan in a few weeks. So I would like to see governments using it more. We've had a great experience with civil society sponsoring these things, media sponsoring these things, but I think that to really respond to my question about curing the ills of democracy, governments need to be involved in some way, maybe at some distance, but still to be involved, and to have it on the agenda of responding, so that people are always really happy coming out of these things because they've talked to people very different from themselves. They even think now in this current environment, it's an accomplishment to actually have a civil conversation with people you disagree with, and they're right. But they would feel so much more empowered if governments listened. And I think one formula for governments listening is if they have a hard problem and they want to share responsibility for the solution. So from my standpoint, the harder the better. And so we hope that will happen. That would be my wish. The other wish is to find a country, a small country, a big country, where they want to help spreading it at the local level. The Mongolians actually had a provision in their law for spreading it at the local level. So they've invited me back to come up with developing a cost-effective method of spreading this at the local level, because that part of the law has never been realized. And so I'd like to make an example of that for local policy making. And so the third aspiration would be spreading it in the schools, which we now have a fair amount of experience of as a form of...
Okay. Okay, well, okay, I will come to you, but we're going to go...
As a form of civic education.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay.
You want me to talk about that?
No, not yet, because someone else is waiting to ask their question, just to check that you've kind of concluded on...
No, that's my best shot at answering your question. Yeah. Good question. Thank you.
Okay, and without annoying you too much, we are going to run out of time. So my proposition is someone's been patiently waiting for their question, so I'm going to invite you to ask it, and then we'll see where we are on time. But if not...
Yeah, my apologies. I talked too long.
Yeah, but completely noted.
I couldn't help myself.
I know. We discussed this, Jim.
Thanks.
Please.
I'm James. I'm a civil servant, but my interest in this comes from my master's thesis, where I was looking at some of your older work and applying it to the Irish mini-publics and referenda. So I spent a long time thinking about this. You've talked about the tremendous benefits of deliberation for those who participate in it, but I think there's a really interesting question around how deliberation interfaces with wider democratic systems, and how we can take those benefits of people being able to take good quality information and change their minds and sort of explode that to the level of a population or a democracy. So my question is, thinking more widely about democratic systems, how can we spread the benefits of deliberation more widely? How can we take the good information that we get on an issue through deliberation and pass that out to the wider electorate so that we can have a more informed electorate and a better quality democracy?
Well, one of the things I've learned, because we did some controlled experiments about that, is that mere exposure to the information, like the briefing materials, hardly changes opinion at all, has no effect. The only thing, and we have done some studies about exposure to the results, and that has some effect, but nothing like the effect of actually deliberating yourself. It's the active process of discussion that really engages people and has a lasting effect. That's why we invented this platform. That's why we're going into the schools. That's why we're trying to find ways of recruiting more and more people to actually deliberate. So I have this vision of sometimes having a deliberative poll, which is representative and will produce good data, but then also at the same time making that an event which convenes many other people to deliberate at the same time. And they could do that on our platform or in other meetings, because it's the experience of actually talking to others, diverse others, in moderated discussion. And the magic thing about the platform is it's online, so you're not just stuck with the people in your neighborhood. You can be connected. We've got algorithms that can connect you to other people very different from you, and the platform works extremely well that way. So I would like to do that. I would like to, the next big event we do, if I can find some resources, and it wouldn't be that expensive, to get all kinds of groups to recruit. And I don't care even if they have strong opinions, because actually those, as long as we have diversity in the small groups and we can have algorithms that will assign them, they will benefit from the discussion. I mean, let's say they will themselves think they benefit from the discussions. It's not a paternalistic judgment from me. They always say that. And so I think we need to spread the deliberative process in order to spread its byproducts of mutual respect and respect for those you disagree with, trust. I mean, we did some projects with Meta. They even trusted Meta more after the end. And I don't mean that as a sarcastic comment, but they did. And Meta, and I pushed Meta to be sure to implement the results, and they have, which is the basis for people having confidence in the, this was the bullying and harassment in the metaverse, and some conditions about the AI agents that they were building, what they could do, what they shouldn't do. A lot of wacky questions about whether AI agents should have romantic relations with their users and things like that. I mean, I never thought of such a thing, but there it was. All kinds of issues. But so I really think that it's the active process of discussion with diverse others over an extended period of time that really, and the time can be as short as a weekend. So you don't need 2 years or even a year with a citizens' assembly. You just need a weekend, but you need a concentrated weekend or its equivalent in time in a short period of time. And it's amazing what happens.
So on the note of amazement, I know there are more questions in the room, but we are over time, and so I want to respect that people have probably got other places to go. What I would say is that Jim's around for another 10 minutes or so, so if you don't mind, Jim, if you've got a burning question, you could come and grab him. The other thing I'd say is there's lots of really interesting people in the room who do deliberation, who are thinking about these things, are coming at it from different perspectives, so you might find something in each other if there's a conversation you want to continue. So I'll bring us to a close. Jim, thanks very much indeed.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And we'll end it there. Okay. All right.
I want to thank you, and I want to thank King's College London. I was partially educated at the other King's College Cambridge, which is also going to do a book launch for me. But in any case, I'm very happy to be here. And I want to say, these are great questions. And this is the only way I learn. If I just gave a speech and there were no questions, I wouldn't learn anything. So thank you.
Thanks, Jim.